news cycle is moving really fast now.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
Welcome aboard. Great to have you in on this Thursday evening. The pace of news never really slows out of Washington. Usually it's political and controversial, and of course the impeachment thing is still front and center as to when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, is going to send articles of impeachment. She says, when I'm ready, but soon. I'm not sure what that means. We're going to get to that tonight with our guest, Tim Edgar, who is, is a security guy. He understands the cybersecurity threat stuff that has been kind of talked about, but kind of back burner at the same time. He's worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations, and he's a go-to guy on all things foreign policy and security for me. So he joins me momentarily. This jet story, this headline here at press time, meaning 1:30 in the afternoon for us, is getting more and more fluid and more of a question mark. You know, yesterday afternoon on the radio, a caller dialed in and said, Dan, do you think this has got something to do with everything else? And I said, well, I think right now we'd be crazy not to wonder out loud about that. And 12, 14 hours later, we've got all sorts of finger pointing and discrepancies going on in terms of whether that thing was shot down purposely or mistakenly. It's a ball of fire. Why did it turn around? Or it appears that it turned around based on the video taken on the ground. The irony is, coincidence, irony, tragedy, is it's a Ukrainian airline, Iranian passengers, some 60 Canadian passengers. So the black box isn't being offered up. So there's a lot of information that's hard. So I'm guessing that we'll just have to see how that whole thing goes and how we press the Iranians to let our own NTSB get in there and figure this whole thing out. In the meantime, we've got headlines of mainstream controversy going on right now, and that is the House's reaction to the information about the attack on General Soleimani. And here's what the network had latest at midday.
Senior commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard says this week's missile strike aimed at U.S. forces in Iraq was just the start of a series of attacks across the region. It comes as President Trump appeared to seek a de-escalation in the tension between the two countries, imposing more economic sanctions instead of ordering a military response.
The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it.
After a briefing Wednesday, Utah Senator Mike Lee says administration officials told senators not to debate the appropriateness of further military action against Iran, despite the Constitution giving Congress the power to declare war.
When we send our brave soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines into harm's way, we owe the American people the decent courtesy to follow the Constitution, to debate and discuss these actions.
The House is expected to take up a resolution this afternoon aimed at limiting the president's ability to take further military action against Iran, something President Trump does not support. He tweeted this morning, hope that all House Republicans will vote against crazy Nancy Pelosi's war powers resolution.
It's a very big issue now because it's nothing less than preventing war as we honor our first responsibility to protect the American people.
Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine has introduced a similar resolution in the Senate.
Yeah, I think the Senate's got less of a chance, of course, passing any kind of resolution here based on, again, the numbers. Right. Welcome, Happy New Year.
Sure, Happy New Year to you.
It's a whole new level right now. The impeachment conversation has been intensely political, but this is now intensely security. When we start, this is a whole different ballgame.
Well, yes, but it's always been that way. When we deal with the impeachment of a president, we're dealing with the commander-in-chief, with the most important leader in the world. That's always the case, and this is just a reminder.
I've done the best I can on this forum and on the radio to stay arm's length from conversations about wagging the dog.
Yeah.
What's your instinct on that?
No idea. You can't know what's in somebody's head. This was an option that was offered to President Trump by the military. He took it. Apparently, after watching TV and getting angry about the pictures he saw about the U.S. Embassy, very impulsive decision. But, you know, as exactly what's going on in his mind, I don't think anyone knows or could know.
But reportedly, officials at the Pentagon, or some, according to New York Times sources, were shocked.
Yes, but then why offer him the option? I mean, I
Right.
think this is an example, this is probably a good lesson for all the people in the national security establishment to stop playing this game of offering an extreme option and a very mild option and something in the middle. Just make your recommendation about what you think they should do.
Has that been your understanding with all your time in Washington, that that's kind of the formula?
Yes.
You know, here's what we could do in way here, and
Right.
here's what we can do here, and hoping there's some kind of what?
Well, it's
common sense.
something like that. I mean, that's the old joke is, you know, I'm offering you 3 options: World War III, abject surrender, and what I want you to do. And so that's kind of, because the president is supposed to be offered more than one option. He's the commander-in-chief, the Defense Department, the intelligence agencies. They're not just supposed to go to the president and say, this is what we want you to do. But when you're offering ranges of options, you ought to be pretty careful about it. You ought to offer options where you think, if he picks the most extreme of options, that's one that I would stand behind. And
Well, I wonder whether the takeout of Soleimani is actually that extreme. Do you think it's that extreme?
we don't know. It's very uncertain. I mean, I think the bigger implications of taking out the #2 guy in a major country, a top general, in a country where we are at least nominally supposed to not be at war with them, is very frightening. Even if this crisis doesn't result in war with Iran or with larger conflict in the Middle East, we're sending a message to the rest of the world: we can take out any of your guys when we want to. And that means it's okay. It's okay to behave this way. I don't think we've fully thought through the implications of that. I mean, it's one thing to strike the leader of ISIS, the leader of Al-Qaeda, to strike foreign government military officials, well, even if very unsavory people, it's a whole new level.
Okay, so you make so much sense. So I'm sitting here listening to you, and once again thinking to myself, how in heaven's name did that thorough conversation not occur? How does a presentation to the president not be made with thinking about 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, 12th, 20th moves? Now, the only thing that brings me to an excuse legitimate for that is the imminency of an attack. You know, and now we're in the situation where the president was leaning on past behavior of Soleimani as rationale, but then saying imminent attack. Defense Secretary Esper 3 days ago said that they were concerned about something within a couple of days. Then they go to the briefings with the Gang of 8 and more folks in the House and the Senate, and we get this kind of reaction from the Republican senator from Utah, who, along with the Kentucky senator, are like livid over it.
It is not acceptable for officials within the executive branch of government, I don't care whether they're with the CIA, with the Department of Defense, or otherwise, to come in and tell us that we can't debate and discuss the appropriateness of military intervention against Iran. It's un-American, it's unconstitutional, and it's wrong.
What I hear was less than satisfying, but one of the arguments that's been bandied about in public, I think, is particularly insulting to logic, the Constitution, and the intent of our founding fathers.
Republicans, not Democrats, Republicans, who are offended about the approach and the "we can't tell you."
Sure.
And you can't tell them that it's bad that we can't tell you.
It is insulting. I mean, the Constitution gives the power to the Congress over power to declare war, certainly power of the purse. Not only do they have every right, they have an obligation to ask these questions. And to have someone push them back and say, you shouldn't debate this, I mean, it is un-American. And so I think they have every right to be angry about that.
We've always had open debate about our military presence and behavior.
We've had, debates going back, to the first Iraq War, the Gulf War, to the Iraq War, to the authorization after 9/11. That's the point of that clause of the Constitution, is that if we make the momentous decision to go to war, we have to have the Congress, the people's representatives on board.
We've formally and informally debated it, before, during, and after every act.
That's right.
The Vice President was on morning television today suggesting that sources and methods would be risked by this information. Well, there's a line of, I think the American people, for the most part, understand that they can't know everything, but they got to know something about imminent threat. The rest of the world needs to know something about imminent threats.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, either this was a hit, sort of a mafia-style whacking, or it was a legitimate strike. And if it's a legitimate...
And the legitimacy is defined by...
By whether there's an imminent threat or not.
Period. And so, for folks, look, no Trump fan, for the most part, people know that about me, I don't want to charge the President of the United States with wagging the dog. I don't want that.
Right.
At the same, I don't want that. I think it's highly irresponsible to knee-jerk react to that. I think Nancy Pelosi's disposition on this, which is that this was an unnecessary strike, is way too politically injected.
We don't know.
But we need to know,
right.
or this thing is going to go the wrong way for these guys. Do they not understand what country they're running?
I think this is a big problem. And part of it is the idea of attacking leaders of terrorist groups before they attack us. I don't think people understand that that was already somewhat of a stretch when it comes to war powers. But when you start adding on top of that military officials of countries that we have bad relations with but we're not at war with, that's taking a stretch and putting it on top of another stretch. So we need a strong case for that.
And of course, though, Iran is a hybrid normal country. High-ranking general, asymmetric terrorism. It's not an easy chart. When we come back, how is Iran dealing with this? I'm talking about on the ground, and then we'll talk about what's going on with impeachment next.
What is happening is that the regime is again using this funeral, using all of this incident, that act of escalation against regime, to say that we are victims here, we are defending in Iran. So completely the conversation has changed, and this has emboldened the Revolutionary Guards and hardliners again in Iranian politics. Okay. Any kind of protest is going to be repressed even harsher, and any kind of civic activities in Iran is going to be way more difficult.
Right. That professor was on with me on the radio yesterday talking about a couple of things. The nature of the religious form of government in Iran under the supreme leader, and the presidency, which brings a whole different moderate approach, and that the growing moderate sentiment in Iran, you pull the rug out from underneath that when nationalistic troubles occur. Right. So the attack has either consolidated or given the hardliners the ability to make it look as if everybody has fallen in line, because oppression becomes more active. And then secondly, he questioned, and I wanted to know, maybe you've got a thought, how many more sanctions can you put on Iran to choke them to death? The president talked about that in his grand announcement yesterday, yet we hear nothing about the specificity of that. Thoughts on how Iran is reacting to all of this?
We have very harsh sanctions on Iran, some of the worst, or
there's not much else we can do.
There's not much else you can do. I mean, the main thing is that Iran doesn't have access to the global financial system, and that is making their life very, very difficult. So I think that's the basic sanctions we've got on there. I think he's absolutely right. I mean, the best way I've heard it described is, whenever there's an incident like this, you see a rally around the flag, and that might have been what Trump was expecting. And we have seen a rally around the flag, just the other flag. We've seen a rally around the Iranian flag, strengthening the hardliners in that country in a way that's just not in our long-term interests.
Yeah, you know what? You're almost a victim of the circus that you create when something as profound as this takeout of Soleimani occurs, and Americans are confused by it.
That's right. I think, first of all, there's no appetite for another major war in the Middle East. I mean, that's one of the ironies is, of course, this is something that some of President Trump's supporters really liked about him. So I don't think we're going to get the same reaction. I mean, this is not 2003 all over again. People are not looking for something to strike at because of something like 9/11. It's very much the opposite. Whereas in Iran, you've gotten a regime which should be teetering, instead getting a shot in the arm, at least temporarily, in terms of this kind of propaganda of being able to say, we're under attack, we've got to rally around our leadership. And even moderates that hate the regime, I think, are feeling somewhat, well, this was really very much an attack on us as a country.
Well, here's the thing that also, dovetailing from that, the president is locked into this idea of while he won't talk about regime change specifically, clearly he wants to see regime change. And the kind of pressure that he is trying to exert now through sanctions, he blew off his big toe. And this is okay, Mr. President, if we do this, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, here's where you're going to be. He is 11 feet out on a 10-foot board from his pullback on the nuclear deal all the way through the tit for tat that's been going on back and forth, resulting in this and then the missile strike. The airplane thing is its own weird anomaly. Right. We'll have to figure that out. He's not a guy that pulls back anything. So how in heaven's name do we expect some kind of, for lack of a better term, stability to go on here?
Well,
if in fact he can't affect the change he wants to affect by upsetting Iranians so much that they overthrow their government. I mean, that's a Hail Mary pass, isn't it?
I think it's just fantasy. It was former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates who said there are 3 words that are almost never spoken in Washington. And then what? And I think that one of the things that we've seen with this president is that he doesn't ask that question. And people often don't.
Yeah, but we were always resolved to the idea that he's a disruptor, that he was a neophyte, that he didn't understand really about politics or the worldview that much, although he had philosophies, we get that, and that the talent around him was supposed to demand that he answer the question and then what by supplying the answer themselves.
That puts too much stock in, frankly, talked a lot about our intelligence, our military professionals. They are good professionals, but that isn't their job. That's the commander-in-chief's job. Their job is to present options. And if the commander-in-chief isn't going to ask those questions, that's a void. And I think we've gone along for too long thinking that you can sort of have things going on autopilot. You can't. I mean, that's not how the world works. Imagine.
Are you telling me at all the time that you spent in Washington on both sides of the aisle that there? I love that line, the 3 missing words in Washington, and then what? Are you telling me that the people of your caliber and in that arena didn't continually always and then what everything that they were planning, thinking, or proposing?
We tried, but I think that the bureaucracy is not well set up to think at that level. It's set up to present options to a political leadership that is supposed to have some sort of strategy.
Pompeo is not an and then what guy?
He does not appear to be an and then what guy.
Esper is not an and then what guy?
I think all of them are taking
Mattis was an and then what guy?
He was, and he got kicked out as a result. You talk about this sort of decision of let's do exactly the opposite of what Obama was going to do, seemed to have been his policy on Iran for a long time.
It's a disease, isn't it?
And this policy is now owned by the president. Whatever happens in Iran, this is not Obama's fault. This is very much on Trump. He's the one who made that decision. We'll see how it works out. If you talk about the regime collapsing, again, it's then what? Libya, Syria, Iraq. How many times do we have to keep making the same damn mistake? It's like, there's no education in the second kick of a mule.
When we come back, the impeachment thing, does it intersect or just run parallel next?
No, I'm not holding them indefinitely. I'll send them over when I'm ready. And that will probably be soon. I just, he said, if you don't send them over, I'm going to pass the Mexico-U.S.-Canada trade agreement. Okay. But no, we want to see what they're willing to do. And the manner in which they will do it. But we will not let them say, oh, this is just like Clinton, fair is fair. It's not.
The standoff continues on sending articles of impeachment over. The Senate's actually thinking about kicking up their own trial without them, which is hilarious.
I
mean, what is that? I mean, it's really a glorified hearing, is all it is if they do that, right? So, what a mess. Impeachment running parallel, or does it intersect here? And if it intersects, do we go back to the premise that there's some wag of dog that, whatever? Is a Republican peel off based on the way the Iranian thing goes? That people go, you know what, this is our moment. You know, maybe we can. And we don't want that to happen, because if Iran goes bad, that means we got a security problem. So,
well, I think part of it, you have to have some faith in the Constitution. I mean, our system is set up so that we can do two things at the same time. There were big foreign policy things going on in the 70s when Nixon was threatened with impeachment and had to resign.
A president can be correct, giving him the benefit of the doubt. He can be correct about a military action and be impeached at the same time.
Of course, if he's committed a high crime or misdemeanor, and if he's convicted by the Senate. And I think the point here is, the one thing where they definitely intersect is even if you don't think it's a wag the dog thing, the accusation is that Trump used the foreign policy process of the United States for a crass, corrupt political motive, and that you can't trust him to act in the motive of the country. That's a very serious issue.
And isn't that, while the two stories run parallel, isn't that advising the American public's mindset about the attack? Because he has not established a trustworthy foundation with the American public, and the trust me, it was imminent thing without specificity isn't working for him.
I think that's right. There's absolutely no, I mean, trust has to generally be earned. We want to give our presidents some trust. We have to. But in this case, he betrayed that trust with this corrupt, you know, what John Bolton called a drug deal that he cooked up for political purposes.
And where is John Bolton?
Exactly.
What will happen? What do you think? Will Pelosi intercept and say, we'll subpoena you if the Senate won't?
I think she certainly has every right to, but it should be the Senate. I mean, this is where the trial is supposed to take place. There have been witnesses in both impeachment trials we've had in our country's history. The reason there were few witnesses under the Clinton trial is because there had been so much facts developed by the special counsel and by the House. We haven't had much fact development in the course of this very, very quick impeachment process in the House. And it was President Trump himself who said, hey, I want witnesses, I want to have my fair hearing. Well, this is it.
By the way, it's an election year, you know. Thanks for your time. Tim, Edgar. It's an election year, you know. Final word, we come back. I think we'll lighten up a little bit. I asked early on this week what the concerns were for Americans, or, you know, Patriots Nation at least. The missile attack, the takeout of Soleimani, or where Tom Brady was going to end up. Andy Gresh, who needs no introduction, will be with us tomorrow night to talk about the latter. Certainly not the former, although he may want to. We'll have some fun. We'll see you on the radio at 3 until 6 on WPRO as well. Good night.